Across the shifting sands of time, there once stood marvels so breathtaking, they defined the very idea of human achievement. The seven wonders of the ancient world. From towering statues carved with divine precision to temples that touched the heavens, each wonder carried the stories, beliefs, and ambitions of the civilizations that built them. But one by one, they vanished, claimed by earthquakes, war, fire, the unstoppable march of history. Today, only one still stands, defying the centuries. The others exist only in ruins, scattered stones, and the fading pages of ancient texts. In this journey, we'll travel back thousands of years to uncover what really happened to these extraordinary creations. Were they destroyed by nature's wrath, stolen by conquerors, or did they simply crumble into dust under their own weight? The answers will reveal not just their fate, but the legacy they left behind. They were once the crown jewels of human achievement, monuments so extraordinary that ancient travelers whispered their names across continents, recording them in scrolls and legends. The seven wonders of the ancient world were not just stone and metal. They were living proof of mankind's boundless ambition, artistry, and engineering genius. But now, only one remains standing. The rest have been swallowed by the earth, claimed by the sea, or crumbled into dust under the weight of time. To understand what happened to these lost marvels, we must return to the ancient Mediterranean, the Near East, and the heart of Hellenistic civilization, where merchants, philosophers, and poets first cataloged these wonders. They were not officially listed by a single authority, but rather compiled through a blend of Greek travelers' tales and scholarly consensus. For the Greeks, these were the must-see destinations of the known world, proof of the heights that human civilization could achieve. The list began with the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, the only wonder still standing. Built over 4,500 years ago as the eternal tomb of Pharaoh Khufu, it was a staggering feat of construction. Millions of limestone blocks weighing tons each, aligned so precisely that even today, its geometry baffles experts. But the pyramid is also a reminder of the impermanence of the rest, because while endured, the other six could not withstand centuries of natural disaster, war, neglect, and deliberate destruction. Among them was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a lush paradise in the heart of Mesopotamia, said it had been built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his homesick queen. Ancient writers describe towering terraces overflowing with exotic plants, watered by ingenious irrigation systems that defied the desert heat. Yet no definitive archaeological proof has ever been found, leading some historians to wonder if it was real at all, or if it once stood in a different city entirely. If it did exist, time and the shifting Euphrates may have erased every trace, as floods and rebuilding projects buried its remains beneath layers of earth and modern settlement. Far to the west, the statue of Zeus at Olympia stood as a beacon of divine power. Crafted by the master sculptor Phidias in the 5th century BCE, this colossal figure, the king of the gods, was seated on a throne of ivory, gold, and precious stones. Pilgrims from across the Greek world traveled to Olympia to gaze upon its majesty during the Olympic Games, believing it to be a living embodiment of Zeus himself. For centuries it inspired awe, but by the Roman era, shifting religious tides and fires began its decline. Eventually, it was dismantled or burned. Historians disagree on the exact fate, but nothing remains today except descriptions and small reproductions on ancient coins. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, was another masterpiece, a vast sanctuary dedicated to the goddess of the hunt and fertility. It had stood for centuries, rebuilt more than once after fires and invasions. Its final destruction came in 401 CE when a Christian mob, under the orders of Archbishop John Chrysostom, tore it down as part of the empire's suppression of pagan worship. The temple's marble columns and sculptures were repurposed in other buildings, scattered across the ancient city. Today, only a single reconstructed column stands in a marshy field, the ghost of what was once a wonder that drew pilgrims from every corner of the known world. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, a grand tomb built for King Mausolus and his queen Artemisia in the 4th century BC, gave us the very word mausoleum. This towering structure combined Greek, Egyptian, and Lycian architectural styles, adorned with intricate friezes and statues. It stood for centuries, surviving even the conquest of Alexander the Great, until a series of earthquakes between the 12th and 15th centuries reduced it to rubble. Crusaders later used its stones to fortify their castle at Bodrum, where some fragments can still be seen. These were more than just buildings. They were symbols of political power, cultural pride, and human ingenuity. Yet each was vulnerable to fire, to the tremors of the earth, to shifting political winds. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, also known as the Pharos, guided sailors safely into the bustling port for over 1,000 years, its gleaming light visible for miles across the Mediterranean. Built on the small island of Pharos in the 3rd century BCE, it stood between 100 and 130 meters tall, making it one of the tallest man-made structures in the ancient world. But earthquakes in 956, 1303, and 1323 shattered it, leaving little more than a stump of masonry. Today, divers explored submerged ruins beneath Alexandria's harbor, a reminder that even the greatest marvels can fall to nature's power. Lastly, there was the Colossus of Rhodes, a bronze giant standing over 30 meters high at the harbor entrance, built to celebrate the island's victory over a besieging army in the 3rd century BCE. Its sheer size and brilliance earned it a place among the 7 wonders, but it stood for only 54 years before an earthquake snapped it at the knees. For centuries afterward, its broken pieces lay where they fell, so massive that even in ruin they inspired awe. Eventually, the bronze was sold off as scrap, disappearing into history. The loss of these wonders was not sudden. It happened over centuries, each fall a separate tragedy, yet together they form a pattern, a reminder that even the greatest achievements of humankind are temporary. The ancients understood this truth deeply, but they also believed in the power of memory. Through writings, art, and oral tradition, they preserved the legends of the 7 wonders, so that, even in absence, they would never truly vanish from the human story. What remains now is the question: if they disappeared once, could they rise again? And if so, would they be the same, or would the world's wonders take new and unexpected forms? The story of the vanished wonders is also a story of human fragility and resilience. Each monument had its moment of glory, basking in admiration, drawing pilgrims and travelers from distant lands, only to meet an end brought about by forces both human and natural. As centuries passed, empires rose and fell, and with them went the care, resources, and reverence needed to maintain these colossal structures. In some cases, the very civilizations that built them had faded into history before the wonders themselves succumbed to ruin. This long arc of creation and destruction is what makes the story so haunting. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon remain perhaps the most mysterious disappearance of them all. Ancient writers like Strabo and Philo of Byzantium painted vivid pictures of terraced gardens rising like green mountains from the arid plains, fed by hidden aqueducts and possibly a chain-pump irrigation system centuries ahead of its time. But where exactly did they stand? Babylon's ruins have been excavated, and yet no definitive traces of such gardens have been found. Some scholars suggest the gardens may have actually been built in Nineveh by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, whose palace featured elaborate gardens and aqueducts. If that is the case, then the Hanging Gardens of Babylon may have been a case of mistaken identity passed down through generations. Regardless of their true location, they must have faced the relentless forces of neglect and the elements. Without constant irrigation and upkeep, the terraces would have dried, the walls crumbled, and the lush vegetation withered into desert dust. In a land where wars were frequent and cities often rebuilt atop older ruins, the physical traces could easily vanish beneath layers of later history. The statue of Zeus at Olympia suffered a different fate, one tied to shifting ideologies. As Christianity spread to the Roman Empire, pagan temples and their idols were increasingly seen as blasphemous relics of a bygone era. The great statue, seated serenely on his throne, had endured for centuries, a masterpiece by Phidias, who had also worked on the Parthenon sculptures. His skill with ivory and gold leaf gave the statue an almost supernatural presence, reflecting the sun in dazzling brilliance. But by the 5th century CE, the Olympic Games were abolished, and the sanctuary fell into disuse. Some accounts claim the statue was moved to Constantinople, only to be destroyed in a palace fire. Others believe it was dismantled where it stood, the precious materials stripped for reuse. Whatever the truth, the world lost not only a marvel of craftsmanship, but a direct link to the spiritual and cultural heart of ancient Greece. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, too, was a victim of repeated destruction, one of the most infamous events in its history, was the arson committed by Herostratus, a man who set fire to the temple in 356 BC simply to immortalize his name. In an ironic twist of history, his crime did make him famous, though the city tried to erase his memory by forbidding his name to be spoken. The temple was rebuilt even grander, but centuries later, invasions and religious transformations sealed its doom. When the Christian Byzantine Empire sought to stamp out paganism, the great sanctuary was razed, its stones taken to construct churches and fortifications. Today, the quiet site near Selçuk, Turkey, holds only scattered foundations, yet in its prime, it was one of the largest temples in the world, dwarfing even the Parthenon. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus stood through many centuries and even survived conquests, but nature proved its undoing. The earthquakes that shattered it left only a heap of carved stone and broken columns. Medieval crusaders, arriving in the region, saw an opportunity. They stripped the tomb's marble to strengthen their fortress, embedding fragments of its sculptures into the castle walls. Those same pieces, weathered by salt air and centuries, can still be seen today in the Bodrum Castle. The rest of the mausoleum's decorations, reliefs, and statuary were taken to museums in Europe during later centuries, piecing together its story but never restoring its glory. The Lighthouse of Alexandria's collapse was not a single event, but a slow-motion tragedy spanning hundreds of years. Built by the Ptolemaic dynasty, its light was said to be visible for 50 kilometers across the Mediterranean, a guiding beacon for the trade ships that made Alexandria one of the greatest cities of antiquity. It was more than a lighthouse. It was a symbol of the city's wealth, learning, and power. But earthquakes in the 10th, 14th, and 15th centuries finally brought it down, each tremor stealing more of its height until nothing remained above the waves. For centuries, fishermen and divers spoke of massive blocks under the sea, and in the 20th century, underwater archaeology confirmed their tales. Today, the ruins rest beneath the harbor, covered in coral, their once smooth granite blocks eroded by the tides, a ghostly reminder of a vanished skyline. And then there is the Colossus of Rhodes, whose destruction came swiftly and without warning. The earthquake of 226 BC struck with such force that the colossal statue, which had taken 12 years to build, crumpled to the ground. Ancient writers recorded that, even fallen, the figure was so immense that few could wrap their arms around its thumb. The Rhodians, interpreting the quake as a sign of divine displeasure, chose not to rebuild it. For centuries, the bronze lay where it fell, until Arab forces captured Rhodes in the 7th century CE and sold the metal to a merchant from Edessa who reportedly needed hundreds of camels to carry it away. The image of those shattered pieces, once a towering guardian of the harbor, being melted down and scattered across the world, is a poignant reminder of how easily even the greatest symbols can be erased. In each of these stories, there's a recurring theme, the interplay between human ambition and the inexorable forces of time and change. The wonders were built to be eternal, to proclaim their builders' names across millennia, yet they fell victim to the same cycle of creation and decay that governs all things. Their disappearance was not merely the result of physical destruction, but of a shift in cultural priorities. Once the civilizations that cherished and maintained them were gone, the wonders became relics, vulnerable to neglect, scavenging, and reinterpretation. Yet their memory endured because they had captured the imagination so completely that even their absence became a kind of presence. They live on in paintings, in travelers' tales, and in the enduring idea of the seven wonders, a phrase that still carries a sense of awe and longing. The fall of the seven wonders is not simply a tale of endings. It is also the story of what comes after. For when a monument vanishes, it leaves behind a gap that can never truly be filled. But in that emptiness, myths grow, stories multiply, and fascination deepens. It is in the ruins and the missing pieces the human imagination thrives, attempting to reconstruct in the mind what no longer stands before the eyes. Even in antiquity, travelers were aware that some of the wonders they sought had already disappeared. But this absence did not diminish their fame. Instead, it transformed them into legends that could be retold and reimagined, reshaped to fit the cultural and political needs of later generations. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, the sole survivor. Its endurance casts a stark shadow over the fate of the others. The pyramid withstood not only the passage of thousands of years, but also invasions, looting, and environmental change. Why did it survive when others did not? Part of the answer lies in its sheer scale and construction. Composed of millions of limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, it was less vulnerable to fire, rot, and minor earthquakes than the more ornate and delicate structures of the other wonders. But perhaps more importantly, Egypt maintained a continuous cultural connection to its ancient monuments, even as dynasties and religions shifted. The pyramid was never entirely abandoned to nature. For the other wonders, however, once the culture that birthed them was gone, there was no one left to care for their upkeep. The Hanging Gardens, whether in Babylon or Nineveh, are perhaps the most haunting absence of all because they challenge the archaeologist's quest for tangible proof. Unlike a pyramid or a lighthouse, gardens are living things that demand constant care. Without human hands to prune, water, and renew them, they quickly revert to wilderness or die entirely. Imagine the once lush terraces. Their cascading green turned brown and brittle. Their water channels choked with silt. Imagine the sun-baked bricks crumbling as roots split them apart, until even the outlines of the walls vanish under drifting sand. The very beauty that made the gardens a wonder also made them fragile, doomed to disappear without a trace if left untended for even a few years. Over centuries, successive rebuildings of cities would bury whatever remained, until no one could even be sure they had existed. In Olympia, the fall of Zeus's statue was as much ideological as it was physical. The shift from polytheism to Christianity in the late Roman Empire was a seismic change in worldview. Where once divine kings like Zeus had enthroned in gleaming temples, now churches rose in their place, filled with new symbols and rituals. In that transformation, many pagan relics were deliberately destroyed, their materials repurposed for Christian buildings. The statue's gold and ivory would have been too valuable to leave untouched, and its dismantling would have been seen as a symbolic victory over the old gods. Yet for those who once stood before it, the loss would have been almost personal, like the silencing of a beloved voice. The Temple of Artemis, one of the largest structures of the ancient world, met its final destruction in part because it had already been wounded so many times before. Each rebuilding was a monumental effort. But there comes a point when even the most dedicated society can no longer muster the resources or will to restore what has been lost. When Christianity became dominant, the pagan temples were not only abandoned but actively suppressed. Stones that had once formed the foundation of Artemis's sanctuary found new life in fortresses, churches, and houses. The sacred site became just another quarry for usable material. What had once been a destination for pilgrims became a swampy ruin, forgotten by all but a few scholars and locals. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus was admired for centuries, and even in ruin, it inspired architects of later ages. Its tiered structure, crowned with a chariot statue, combined elements of different cultures in a way that reflected the cosmopolitan world of the Eastern Mediterranean. But earthquakes are indifferent to cultural fusion. As the tremors toppled its columns and shattered its friezes, the mausoleum lost its grandeur. Crusaders saw the fallen marble as an opportunity, stripping it for their own purposes. In this way, the mausoleum quite literally became the foundation for a new chapter history, transformed into fortress walls that would face entirely different battles. The Lighthouse of Alexandria's story is perhaps the most fitting metaphor for the fate of the wonders. Its purpose was to guide travelers safely to shore, yet could not save itself in the relentless assault of the sea and the earth beneath it. Earthquakes turned its once proud tiers into rubble, which the sea claimed and hid. For centuries, it was remembered only through accounts and artistic depictions, until divers finally found its remains. In those massive blocks lying silently underwater, we can almost feel the echo of the lighthouse's light, still trying to reach us through the murk of centuries. The Colossus of Rhodes remains unique among the wonders for the brevity of its existence. Barely half a century after its completion, it was toppled by an earthquake. The Rhodians, bound by religious interpretation, refused to rebuild it, believing the quake to be a divine message. The statue's ruins became an odd sort of wonder in themselves, drawing travelers who marveled at the scale of its fallen pieces. The sale of its bronze centuries later scattered its material legacy to the winds, but the image of a giant figure standing guard over a harbor has persisted in art and imagination ever since. When we look at these stories together, patterns emerge. War, religious change, natural disaster, and neglect all played their roles. But perhaps the most powerful force of all was the shift in human priorities. Monuments that were once central to cultural identity became irrelevant to the societies that inherited them. The resources that once went into their upkeep were redirected elsewhere, and so they crumbled. The great irony is that while the physical structures disappeared, their fame did not. If anything, their absence has only amplified their legend. A standing wonder is a marvel, but a vanished wonder is a mystery. And mysteries are harder to forget. Even now, the Seven Wonders continue to inspire debates, reconstructions, and even proposals to rebuild them. The idea of seeing the Colossus rise again or the lighthouse shining over Alexandria's harbor sparks the same fascination that ancient travelers felt. But in truth, any such reconstructions would be new creations, modern interpretations of ancient dreams. The original wonders are gone, and in their place we have something equally powerful: the enduring human desire to remember, to imagine, and to keep alive the stories of what once was. The disappearance of the Seven Wonders is also a mirror reflecting our own age. We live surrounded by steel towers, suspension bridges, and monumental stadiums, each built with the pride and ambition of the ancients. Yet the story of the wonders whispers a warning. Nothing, no matter how mighty, is beyond the reach of time. For every ancient monument that fell, there was once a moment when its builders believed it would last forever. The men who laid the foundation stones of the Lighthouse of Alexandria did, so knowing that it would stand as a beacon for centuries, never imagining that earthquakes would one day drag it into the sea. The sculptors of Colossus of Rhodes surely thought their bronze giant would tower over the harbor for generations, never suspecting that a single tremor could bring it crashing down. But history has a way of humbling even the grandest visions. Imagine the ancient traveler, a Greek merchant perhaps, who sets out from his homeland to see the marvels of the known world. He sails Alexandria first, entering the harbor at night, the great lighthouse's beams sweeping across the dark waters, guiding him safely to shore. Days later, he wanders the bustling city, marveling at its libraries and palaces. Then he sails east of Rhodes, where the Colossus stands like a god made flesh, gleaming in the sun. He passes under its shadow into harbor, feeling small but exhilarated. From there, he travels inland to Ephesus, where the Temple of Artemis rises from the plain, surrounded by pilgrims. He sees its vast forest of columns, hears the chants of worship, smells the incense carried on the breeze. In Babylon, he walks through the city gates, following the sound of water until he finds the fabled hanging gardens. Tiers of greenery define the desert, the air cool with shade, the scent of flowers mingling with the distant roar of the Euphrates. In Olympia, he stands before Zeus himself, the god's calm yet commanding gaze meeting his own. Finally, he journeys to Halicarnassus, where the Mausoleum towers above the city, a fusion of styles that reflects the mingling of cultures in the eastern Mediterranean. And, if he is fortunate enough to travel to Egypt, he gazes upon the Great Pyramid, its angled sides catching the desert sun, a mountain of stone that seems eternal. For that traveler, the Seven Wonders would not simply be destinations. They would be proof that humanity could rival the gods in ambition and artistry. Yet for us, looking back, his journey is impossible. We can follow his route, but we will find only ruins, empty sites, and the occasional fragment in a museum case. The lighthouse is gone, the Colossus gone, the temple gone, the gardens gone, the statue gone, the mausoleum gone. The Great Pyramid stands alone, a solitary witness to an age of marvels. In the centuries after their disappearance, the memory of the Seven Wonders did not fade, but instead began to grow. Roman historians wrote about them, medieval travelers retold their descriptions, and Renaissance artists tried to imagine what they had looked like. In many cases, these later depictions bore little resemblance to reality. The Colossus, for example, is often shown straddling a harbor entrance, 1 foot on each side, which would have been an engineering impossibility. But the inaccuracy did not matter. The idea of the wonders had taken on a life of its own. They became symbols not of specific architecture, but of human aspiration itself. That enduring fascination is why archaeologists still scour ancient sites for traces of them. In Alexandria's harbor, divers swim among the submerged blocks of the lighthouse, piecing together its original height and design. In Bodrum, fragments of the mausoleum's friezes and columns are studied and preserved, their intricate carvings speaking to the artisans who shaped them. At Olympia, the foundations of the temple where Zeus once sat are carefully mapped, while scholars pore over ancient texts, trying to determine exactly how Phidias achieved the statue's extraordinary presence. The fate of the Hanging Gardens remains the most tantalizing mystery. Every new archaeological discovery in Mesopotamia rekindles hope that their remains might be found. Some researchers point to elaborate aqueducts in Nineveh as possible evidence, while others insist that the gardens must have been in Babylon itself, their absence in the archaeological record explained by centuries of river shifts and urban reconstruction. The debate continues, and with it, the gardens live on in the public imagination. There is a certain irony in the fact that the destruction of the wonders has, in many ways, made them more famous than they were in life. When they stood, they were admired by those who could see them in person. Now that they are gone, they are admired by everyone who has ever read about them. They are no longer confined to a specific place or time. Instead, they exist everywhere, in books, in films, in classrooms, in the minds of people who dream of traveling back in time to stand before them. Their physical absence has turned them into universal myths. And myths have a peculiar kind of immortality. A building can fall, a statue can crumble, but a story can be told forever. In that sense, the seven wonders have not truly disappeared. They live on every time a teacher describes them to a class, every time an artist tries to paint them, every time a traveler stands at a ruin and imagines what once was. Even the Great Pyramid, which has survived so long, will one day succumb to the same fate as the others. When that day comes, it will join them in the realm of memory and legend. For modern historians and preservationists, the story of the wonders is a powerful lesson. It teaches that the survival of great works is not guaranteed, and that protecting cultural heritage requires more than admiration. It demands constant care, resources, and the will to maintain it across generations. The ancients built their wonders with the belief that they would last forever. We, knowing their fate, have the opportunity to do better. Whether we will rise to that challenge remains to be seen. The afterlife of the seven wonders exists in two parallel worlds, the one shaped by archaeology and the one shaped by imagination. Archaeology works in the language of stone fragments, soil layers, and radiocarbon dating, piecing together tangible evidence from what remains. Imagination, however, builds from absence, filling in the gaps with visions of grandeur. Together, they have kept the wonders alive for over 2 millennia after their disappearance. And perhaps it is the truest measure of their success, that they have transcended their physical form to become ideas, immortal in the human mind. In recent years, digital technology has added a new dimension to this immortality. Architects, historians, and computer artists have used 3D modeling to recreate the Lighthouse of Alexandria, letting people walk its marble floors virtually and gaze out over a reconstructed Mediterranean horizon. The Temple of Artemis has been rendered in brilliant detail, its forest of columns rising once more beneath a painted ceiling. The Colossus of Rhodes has been imagined in countless forms, some true to ancient descriptions, others fantastical, like the impossible straddling figure that popular culture loves. These reconstructions do not replace the originals, but they do something the originals could not. They allow anyone anywhere to experience them, breaking the limitations of geography and time. Yet with every new digital image or museum display, the question arises, what have we truly lost? It is not simply the stones and statues, but the living context in which they existed. The Hanging Gardens were not just plants on terraces. They were a symbol of royal devotion, an engineering marvel, and a sensory experience. The cool mist on the skin, the scent of foreign blossoms, the sound of running water in the desert air. The statue of Zeus was not just gold and ivory. It was a focal point of a sacred space during a gathering that united the Greek world. The Temple of Artemis was not just marble and sculpture. It was a spiritual center, alive with rituals, music, and the presence of countless pilgrims. To lose the wonders is to lose those living moments, those connections between place, people, and purpose. Still, there is a strange kind of hope embedded in their disappearance. Because they are gone, they belong to no single nation, no single people. They are part of the collective heritage of humanity. This universality ensures that interest in them will never fade. A child in South America can be just as captivated by the story of the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus as a child in Turkey or Greece. A student in Japan can be inspired by the Colossus of Rhodes just as much as one in Europe. In this way, the wonders have become a bridge, not just between past and present, but between cultures, reminding us that human ambition has always been a shared trait. The fate of the seven wonders also forces us to confront our own monuments. What will future generations say of our skyscrapers, our stadiums, our monuments carved in glass and steel? Will they stand for thousands of years, or will they vanish like the Colossus, leaving only scattered fragments and second-hand descriptions? Already, some modern structures have been lost within decades of their construction, destroyed by war, disaster, or neglect. The ancients would recognize this cycle well, for it is the same one that claimed their greatest works. In a sense, every wonder, ancient or modern, exists in a race against time. Natural forces are patient. Earthquakes wait silently beneath the ground. Storms gather over centuries, and the slow creep of erosion wears away even the hardest stone. Human forces can be quicker and more decisive. A single siege, a single fire, a single decision to demolish can erase centuries of history in a moment. Yet the persistence of the seven wonders in our cultural memory proves that physical destruction is not the same as erasure. A monument can fall, but if it has captured enough hearts and minds, it can live on in ways its builders never imagined. That endurance through memory is what connects the seven wonders most directly to us. In their rise, they show us the heights human creativity can reach. In their fall, they remind us of our limits, and in their survival as stories, they reveal the strange immortality of human fascination. When a traveler today stands among the scattered stones of the Temple of Artemis, they are part of a chain stretching back to the pilgrims of antiquity. When a diver touches a barnacle-covered block from the Lighthouse of Alexandria, they are touching a fragment of a dream once shared by thousands. Even the imagined sight of the Hanging Gardens, brought to life in a modern painting, allows us to share the awe of an ancient visitor. There is also an unspoken challenge in their story. If the ancient world's greatest achievements could vanish, then so can ours. This is not a call to despair, but a call to preservation. We cannot stop earthquakes or storms, but we can choose to protect what we have built from neglect, from greed, and from the slow forgetting that could be more dangerous than any natural disaster. The wonders disappear because, at some point, they stopped mattering to the people who inherited them. That is the fate we must avoid for the monuments of our own time. And so, the seven wonders remain with us, not in marble, bronze, or gold, but in words, art, and imagination. They exist in every retelling, every classroom, every quiet moment when someone reads their names and wonders what would have been like to stand before them. They live in the spark of curiosity that sends researchers diving into the harbor of Alexandria or digging through the plains of Mesopotamia. They endure in the hands of model builders, in the brushstrokes of painters, in the pixels of digital reconstructions. In this way, they have achieved a kind of immortality that no stone or metal could guarantee. Perhaps, in the end, this is what makes them truly wondrous. Not that they were built, but that they are still with us, even in absence. They challenge us to remember, to imagine, and to dream bigger. They are proof that while time can topple walls and statues, it cannot touch the human need to create and to be remembered. The seven wonders have vanished from the earth, but they have taken root in something even more enduring, the human story. And as long as we keep telling that story, they will never really disappear. The seven ancient wonders may have disappeared, but their spirit still shapes our dreams of beauty, power, and immortality. History whispers their names, and it is up to us to keep them alive. If this story has opened your eyes to the forgotten grandeur of the past, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to History Vault for more deep dives into the mysteries of our world. Your curiosity keeps history alive.